Hello guys, and welcome back to Joe's Ventures, and today we're doing another episode of our Jurassic World Evolution 2 mod spotlights, where we take a look at some of the wonderful mods people have been making and compare them to their real-life fossil counterparts. And today, we've got a whole pack by OG Bear, which I'm really excited to go through because it's all about the pterosaurs, and I've really been wanting to talk about pterosaurs of depth because most of the mods really just like pterosaur here. They're a marine reptile here and there. I'd love to see more these kind of mods because they're animals that don't get talked about a lot because obviously dinosaurs take up the limelight. But I'm really excited to talk about these guys, and I'm just really excited to get into it. So again, this entire pack, the pterosaur paleo edits, is all done by OG Bear, who's done all sorts of different paleo edits that I've covered. Man, it's really wonderful. I'm in love with like all the different colors and stuff he's put on, and it really did a wonderful job. So I'm really excited to get stuck into this one. So we're going to be starting off with our we're going in alphabetical order. So we're going to be starting off with Serradactylus. So let's get ourselves a good picture of what in flight, I think. Let's see if we can get a good picture. Well, we can use this at least, so let's see if we can get a good one. Where's the other one? I think there was two. Didn't two come out? Let's see if you can find the other one. Oh, here it is. So here is Serradactylus, and there's a lot of really good changes, I think. Maybe I'll... Yeah, that looks a little better. But you can see a lot of the wonderful changes on here, so let's have a looky-loo. We can see, because these guys are relative of Ornithochirus, they're and that family Ornithochiridae, so very similar to animals like Tropognathus, as we'll get into later, and things like that. A really kind of early relative of these guys. Very interesting group of animals. These guys weren't kind of the largest, but the skull was only about 50 centimeters long, so they probably didn't have a very huge wingspan of about a couple meters. But yeah, I really like these guys anyway. I think they got in because they were already mentioned in Jurassic Park novel, so I think that's another cool little way to represent them. But yeah, I really like how this guy came out. You can see most of the skull has been changed, so it looks much more like your typical ornithochirid. And they got rid of the crest, and there's no evidence for soft tissue crests on pterosaurs like these. Cool speculation though, but I thought it looked kind of ugly. And you know, there is evidence of soft tissue on some types of pterosaurs, but it seems like these guys most likely didn't really have them. But really cool guys. And we can see some of the changes here. Pterosaurs generally have similar-ish bodies. There's some changes similar to like how birds, they all have wings, but wings have different shapes and wing loadings and things like that, able to better fly. These guys kind of had that same thing, and these guys would have been kind of almost like a seabird, like a seagull, kind of flying over large coastal areas, finding fish and things like that, kind of generalist, that kind of thing. So kind of like that kind of seabird. And these guys were pretty big. They got about 5 meters or 18 feet from wingtip to wingtip, so they're quite big. And the name actually means atrocious... It's an atrocious finger from Serra, because the name Serra is the Brazilian state where this guy's found, and again, he's from Brazil. But yeah, I'm really big fan of this guy. You can see some of the changes. You can see the 3 fingers there. Pterosaurs are very weird because they have their wings situated basically on their pinky finger. So all of this is just their really long pinky finger, and then they have their 3 fingers there. A wonderful skull. I'm really glad with how this guy came out, but I don't want to talk about pycnofibers on this guy. I think I'll save it for another one. I think I'll save it for potentially... I'll talk about it sometime. I don't want to start off talking about pycnofibers, but we'll let these guys fly off and do their thing. I was going to say swim off. They don't look like swimmers to me, especially they don't look like swimming now. So yeah, these guys, we're moving on to the next one. We've got Dimorphodon. Oh, so let's get another view of this one. So let's see if we can get one in the sunlight. There's a... Oh, I like this one here. This one looks really wonderful with that. Oh, that's not what we wanted. I want to just get rid of that UI, so that's G. There we are. So look at this wonderful guy here, pink. Let's see if we can find a slightly nice one. Here we are, slightly nicer in the light, but we can see some of the wonderful changes made to this Dimorphodon. So Dimorphodon is one of those really cool, like, early pterosaurs, so from a group Dimorphodon today. So kind of his own group of like these really weird early Jurassic pterosaurs with these big heads and things like that. Really different ecology. And these guys were almost considered a fish hunter, but these guys almost likely kind of been almost more like a puffin or something like that. It's thought to be, but then it's kind of been like, no, no, no. But it actually shows that these guys have pretty powerful musculature for walking, running, and climbing. So these guys could have almost been like a hawk or not even a hawk, something that's just able to climb around and not just be on the sea all the day and all that. But these guys are actually quite good at like climbing and things like that. They were good at landing instead of on the air, and these guys kind of were very interesting in that, and they were quite active as well. And since these guys were quite early, these guys kind of really tells us a lot about the early evolution of pterosaurs, which is really, really awesome. And yeah, these guys were obviously quite different in ecology from other guys. These guys were good on land, and these guys were potentially like macro or micro predators. They ate kind of larger things, potentially hunting insects, small lizards and small mammals, and potentially hunting things like that, which is a very interesting ecology for these guys. And these guys were found by Mary Anning, who's a very famous paleontologist. She was kind of like the first woman paleontologist, and very interesting history. And it was collected from Lyme Regis in Dorset in 1828. And yeah, really interesting, and also been found with like animals such as Serradactylus and things like that. And I think it's really interesting to talk about these ecologies, but these guys potentially were very, very different in terms, because there's kind of this myth that all pterosaurs were kind of fish eaters, but really they took over a lot of ecologies over the span of the Mesozoic, and even had to compete with birds sometimes. So I think that's another really cool little fact. But yeah, I'm really cool. Really love this Dimorphodon. Big, big fan. Really, really love that. I think the major thing is kind of there's another little like patagium or skin flap that's kind of on the back of their legs here, and they've got this really long tail that's unlike a lot of the later pterosaurs. They've got this long tail, so similar things like Aramphorhynchus and other Dimorphodontidates animals. Really, really wonderful. I'm a big fan of how this guy's come out, and I've got to mention obviously pycnofibers, but I'll get into that potentially, probably with Geosternbergia or something. So we'll keep going on and wait to talk about that. So we have got here. Wait, no, talk about Tapejara because we've got a very interesting thing to talk about with them. So next, we've got Dimorphodon, which is a really, really cool little guy here. Well, not little, he's quite big. So we'll release him anyway. So let's get a... Ooh, that one looks perfect. We got a really good look at this. Really good look at the skull here. Really, really awesome. So we've got Dinosaurus, or Dinosaurus. I believe you have pronounced that. I've always had trouble pronouncing this one, but I really like how this one's come out. I gotta say, I just love the patterns that OGB has been putting on them. But these guys are very, very interesting. These guys were discovered by paleontologist C.C. Young in 1964 from a well-preserved partial skull and some skeleton. And these guys were quite big, 3-meter wingspan, and they kind of lived in the early Cretaceous, so a little bit later. And these guys were closer relatives of, like, they kind of had those later pterosaurs, kind of related to our starkids, but they're not closely related to them. But these guys have been speculated to have a much more kind of interesting ecology. So these guys were potentially things like oyster catchers or shorebirds, plovers. These guys would be rummaging around in sand, and they have these large teeth as well, so they'd be looking for mollusks and freshwater snails and mussels, and they had these big teeth and these upturned jaws that were able to kind of probe in the sands and rocks and pull them out and things like that. So I think that really shows that pterosaurs are much more diverse than just fish eaters. So these guys had a very different ecology to them. And they were, for the most part, like a passive hunter, but they may have eaten like small vertebrates and things like that. But we also know because they got these really cool teeth and things like that, that really just gives them an interesting ecology. And we also see that these guys have this really cool crest here. It's mostly like kind of soft tissue, or like it's supported, so that can only be like keratin and things like that, that really give it this round shape here, which I'm in love with, and this little bit that comes out here. But yeah, for the most part, it's pretty good. Let's see if we can. Yeah, these guys have it down to legs. In the later pterosaurs, it's typically kind of like that. It comes down to the legs here, so it's pretty much spot on. These guys were much more similar to bats in that way, but the obviously, as I mentioned, the hand's quite different. The bats usually just have their whole hand kind of with skin flaps or patagia between them, but these guys just have their three fingers and the huge wing supported on their pinky finger. And in birds, it's just feathers. So that's kind of the difference between the three major vertebrate groups. But I love that. I just love these guys. They have such a different ecology, and I love how OGB kind of represented them here. I'm a big fan. I love them. I like you, love them a lot. So we got these guys sorted, and I really love these guys, especially seeing you. It's really nice to see pterosaurs getting some love. I love pterosaurs. I like all animals, but pterosaurs I think is just cool because they're often so represented, and they're just so weird. I love them. So that's the Pteris. OGB has really done a wonderful job. So let them fly out of there. So next we've got Geosternbergia. So let's see if we can get one that's... Oh, here's a good one. Oh, that looks nice. Look at this one. So this is Geosternbergia. Is a close relative of Pteranodon, and is in the group Pteranodontidae, which includes Pteranodon. These guys were actually considered the same genus. They were a species of Pteranodon. I can't even speak properly today. They were a species of Pteranodon Sternbergia, or Sternbergi, so they actually changed it into a different genus, Geosternbergia. Though I think there's an argument to be made you could lump them, whatever, taxonomy being taxonomy, but whatever. These guys are from the Niobrara chalk, so like the latest late Cretaceous, so they're kind of that kind of area. Niobrara formation, so like Campanian age, about 70, 80 million years ago, kind of that ballpark. I'm not going to give you exact dates because the fossil record being the fossil record, but these guys were kind of described in 1966 as Pteranodon sternbergi, and then they were kind of split by next one at like 1952. That's when they were discovered, and then kind of split over time. And these guys were very large pterosaurs. We're getting into the bigger ones now. These guys had a wingspan of over 7 meters or 24 feet. And they had this really long skull, as you can see here, that was over 1 meter long. And they have that really long beak. And it's often been speculated that these guys were potentially much more like albatrosses in their ecology. They were able to, because since they were so large and had such long wings, they were able to just soar on ocean currents and ocean the air that are kind of, they're just really effective at getting thermals and things like that. So I think that's really interesting. And you can see they have this very interesting crest as well, especially about the eyes here. They have that like short neck, but they have this huge crest, and it like rises about 50 centimeters or 18 inches above the eyes, and kind of really gives it that cool display. And I don't think we have too many. There's several specimens, and there's evidence for sexual dimorphism within this group, because obviously the larger males kind of have the bigger, flashier crests to attract the females, and the females are probably potentially a little bit smaller or just do not have this large crest. It's kind of really hard to tell because often you need lots and lots of specimens, but luckily we have lots and lots of specimens of these kind of pterosaurs, especially like Pteranodon. We have a pretty fairly good idea what's male and female, which I think is really interesting. And at the time this guy was alive, about 86 million years ago, see, that's correct. The shallow seas, these guys would have lived in the Western Interior Seaway, so that would have been when North America was split by the big ocean, kind of, or sea in there. So there would have been lots of mosasaurs, fish, squid, turtles, and plesiosaurs to live in there, and these guys would have like glided over there, potentially globally, but that's kind of where we find their fossils. But yeah, I just really think that such a cool ecology. These guys were kind of like albatrosses and things like that. And these guys are known mainly from these late Cretaceous rocks and things. And they believe that Geosternbergia lived before Pteranodon and may have been its direct ancestor. So these guys may have been the direct ancestor to Pteranodons, but we kind of don't know. And they were part of a larger lineage of these pterosaurs called the ornithochirids, like Serradactylus and other guys coming up, like Maaradactylus and things like that. But these guys lost their teeth and kind of got that toothless beak look, while the other ones kept their teeth and kind of used that to catch fish as well. So yeah, really, really interesting. I'm a big fan of these guys. You can see it's pretty spot on from what we know. It's obviously got to stick to the animations, but yeah, it's really cool to see this wonderful pterosaur. I love the colors on the face here, like the bands on the beak, and then this wonderful big crest that's nice and colorful. Really, really wonderful. I'm a big fan. There's a Dinosaur. Dinosaur, little man. So yeah, really, really wonderful. I'm a big fan of how this guy's come out. So next we got our pterosaur Maaradactylus. So let's have a look at him. Another ornithochirid. So let's see if we can get a good view of this guy. So we can see he's a little bit more toothier. Really, really toothier. Look at that. Wow. Really, 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 really toothy. So these guys were also found in Brazil and is known from a single incomplete skull that was discovered in lower Cretaceous rocks of the Center Formation in Sierra. It's like Serradactylus. I'm not sure the same age though. You can see they've got this very, very long skull, as you can see. And these guys are roughly about 2.5 feet long or 75 centimeters. And they have this short crest at the tip of their snout here, which potentially could have been for display, things like that. But although the lower jaw was not found, it's likely that they're kind of combined because we have other specimens like that, other species. And these teeth, as you can see, they are quite large, and they would have corresponded, like the largest would have been at the front of the snout. And although it's only known from a skull, there's similar taxa, so relatives, so one of the ornithochirids, are about like it gives us a wingspan of about 4.5 meters or 15 feet, so still quite a large animal, to be honest. And these guys are kind of in that Orangia kind of ornithochirids, so they're related to Tropognathus, which is the larger one we'll get into later, and Epinguara. And these several guys, including Maaradactylus, would have been found in this basin, and they would have been distinguished from each other by their teeth and crest. Like, how many birds did they, even though they live in the same ecosystems, they have so many different ecologies and colors and things like that, that it allows them to speciate and become different. And I think that's also really cool here. But these guys, like all other known ornithochirids, they were kind of ocean-going fish eaters, so typically things like other seabirds, pyrans, shearwaters, muttonbirds, albatrosses, mollymawks, just that kind of ecology. So there's lots terns, all of these kind of really interesting storm petrels, all those kind of really interesting seabirds. They were kind of took that kind of place in the Mesozoic, which I think is really interesting. And all known, as I mentioned, they had these like short tails with these long, narrow wings that allowed them to better get these currents, and they had these very, very large teeth that allowed them to catch slippery prey such as fish by potentially diving, or skim feeding is something that's been speculated, but it's pretty much impossible. It's a really specialized thing that only like some birds can use, even like one bird, but their jaws would have broke instantly if they tried that, but they would have probably been hanging around on the surface, potentially diving in to catch prey. So that's really, really interesting. And yeah, really, really awesome. I love this Maaradactylus. I think OGB really did a wonderful job giving us these guys. Really, really beautiful animals. I just love these guys. Really, really wonderful. So yeah, we're going to move on to the next guys. We have got Pteranodon, everyone's favorite. So I think this one is the skin that he made. To tell you these, because I mentioned that the Serradactylus had the crest, but there's also a version with the crest if you want it. And there's a couple other versions I'll get into, but we've got the Jurassic Park skin version he made, and then he's got the Jurassic World version. So I believe this one is the Jurassic Park one. So we've got obviously probably one of the most famous pterosaurs of all time. We've got the Pteranodon. So these guys are also found in the Barra chalk from a little bit later, I think. These guys are obviously one of the first things when you think of it. When you think of a pterosaur, obviously these guys are probably one of the first things that come to mind. Let me just get a slightly better. I want to get a slightly better. Yeah, there we are. Get a slightly better view of it because they're kind of like all flying around and being kind of awkward. So let's see if we can find. There we are. That's probably better. So you can see this wonderful look at this guy. Let's see. So I really like the skin on this guy. I like the reds. It really brings out the color, and I love the bands on the face there. These guys were kind of hold the place. They held the place for the largest flying animal of all time until like Tropognathus and the giant Astarchids took that role. But these guys are still very, very large. They have a wingspan that's close to 7 meters, or about 21 feet or so. They still dwarf like albatrosses. Albatrosses today are huge birds, and they have a wingspan about 3 meters. So they're definitely much larger. And these guys were discovered really in the early days of paleontology by Dr. Marsh, or Othniel Charles Marsh, who was one of the men responsible for recovering much of the past of kind of North America, which was really interesting. And the type and only species currently regarded now is Pteranodon longiceps, which was named by Marsh in 1878. And this is kind of the most common of the Nimbara pterosaurs, and we know quite a lot about them. And even more recently, there was kind of a split. There was a genus of Dawndraker was assigned, though there's a lot of people saying these splits are kind of... And being taxonomy, it's very likely that this is not a true taxonomic division, and it's just kind of bad people just trying to split for splitting. But this kind of is what it is. And this guy kind of gets his name, means toothless wing, because these guys, like other pteranodontids, these guys had pretty much no teeth. These guys were toothless, even though the Jurassic World one kind of gave them teeth. These guys do not. And their common motif is kind of perching on branches and things like that, though they wouldn't be able to do that. They were most likely bit more adapted for walking, so these guys were much larger. And they do not, there's often people like talk about, oh, they got big talons to grab prey, but they did not have that ability. They probably wouldn't have been able to do that. And these guys, as real as animals, you can see they have a somewhat of like an overbite, and they would have potentially often actually portrayed as kind of like migratory and picking prey off the water surface. But these guys are somewhat of that overbite. These guys would have, as I mentioned, potentially been divers or taking an ecology similar to modern seabirds, where they would be eating fish all the time and really only coming onto land to breed. And these guys, these large crests are really only present in the males, and they varied widely between the individuals because we have lots of specimens of Pteranodon, and it suggests that these guys were used for display. So these big crests would be able to signal. They're like the peacock feathers on the peacock feathers on the end of the tail. These guys would have been able to make them look big and scary and like, well, not big and scary, big and sexy, and be like, yeah, mate with me. I'm the biggest dude on the block, all that kind of stuff. And there was early theories that suggested that these guys may have actually used their crest to counterbalance their beak, or even used to help flying, but it clearly did not do it. But also, we know that females were actually only half the size of the males and just had a small crest, and which I think is really, really cool. And another thing we know about these guys is the young were most likely precocial. So a lot of birds are something that we call atricial. That means they're kind of born needing to be raised by their mothers. They need like being fed. They need to be taken care of. So that's something that you'd think like baby birds. But if you look at things like turtles and crocodiles, they're considered precocial, atricial. So they would have been like precocial. I got the terms wrong. Atricial is kind of when they're like little babies, things like that. Precocial is when they're pretty much born ready to go. So something like crocodiles, pterosaurs, things like that. So pterosaurs would have been a really good example of that. They would have laid kind of small eggs, and something more similar to a turtle. So they kind of had different ecologies as they grow up. So a baby turtle is obviously not going to eat the same thing as an adult turtle. So especially like a leatherback. So what kind of happened is that as they grew up, they kind of lived different lives into different things and kind of took different ecologies. And What we do know is that these guys were exceptional, and there was like young, rearing near adult sizes under a year, so they would have grown quite fast. And they showed determinate growth. That means they would have grown until they kind of just reached their adult size and stopped. And it shows that, like a lot of dinosaurs, these guys were potentially quite warm-blooded, so they would have been able to maintain their own body heat regardless of what the environment was, and having things like pycnofibers and stuff. But at the cost, they had to eat a lot more to maintain that. And these guys will range all across the Niobrara Sea, and there's been, I believe, remains across the world as well. So they were really able to soar, and they're actually more adept in water than we thought. We've been studies looking at, especially by Mark Whitten, who's kind of the pterosaur guy in the paleontology community. There's been shown that these guys could perform a quad launch off the water, and they would have been able to dive. Like if you've seen gannets, they will dive into the water to grab prey, and these guys were probably experts at that as well. And they were able to like swim for a little bit and dive and things like that. So I think that's really, really cool. Really, really awesome. So next we've got the other Pteranodon. We'll have a look at this guy as well. So I've kind of already talked about the ecology and all that. So I like this one. This is pretty much the same, but like, because I've already talked about all the kind of ecology, things like that for these guys, but you can see the different colors here, the red and white. I think it really fits the Jurassic Park kind of color more. These guys are kind of a little bit more varied. I really love these guys, so you can see some of the... I think the crest is literally the same model. There's obviously some variation, I think, just to try and make the little bit apart, but you can really show here the overbite here, that kind of that turn on the crest there, and then we can see a lot of the wonderful colors. These guys, as you can see, that's very reminiscent of like an albatross. They have, because albatrosses have quite long wings and quite thin wings that really allow them to catch those ocean currents and thermals that allow them to fly. Even with like minimal effort, so they can stay on the wing pretty much forever. And yeah, really, really wonderful. I think the patagium is probably a little bit too high there. The patagium would have actually probably been coming up to the legs here, so it would have created a much more streamlined appearance. I think this is kind of an issue for all the pterosaurs in the game at the moment, but it is what it is. This one's kind of a little bit better, but they would have kind of pretty much like come to the knees or so, and there would have been another kind of little patagium in between the legs there. So yeah, almost there. Really, really awesome though. I can't wait to see, like, because we're getting feathered quets and stuff like that. I can't wait to see like a full-on just remaster of making all these animals more and more paleo accurate. That's going to be so cool. But look at that, beautiful. I'm a big fan. I like the little changes. I like the crest a little bigger and the beak a little bit more overturned. This one's kind of like a little bit more tamer, but I think like the differences between them. Really, really awesome. So yeah, that's really cool. So let's move on. We've got Tapejara, and this is the one I really wanted to talk about, pycnofibers, because we kind of have a good idea what they're like. It's really, really awesome. So let's see if we can get one there. Ah, this has to be one of my favorite. I love how he did the crest. Look how awesome that crest is. So this is Tapejara. So in the game, it has a weird like taxonomy thing, because these guys obviously remember the Tapejara Day and all that, but the one in the game looks much more like Tropognathus, which is a close relative of these guys, but they had a much larger crest. Tapejara is a little bit smaller. These guys got about 1.5 meters long, so they weren't very big. Even like 3.5 is probably a very big individual, and they were found in the same place as kind of Serradactylus and Tropognathus and things like that. And these guys kind of had all sorts of different adaptations. These guys have actually often been thought as much more of like an omnivore or a herbivore. So these guys potentially would have been eating plants, kind of something. I'm trying to think of a good example, like maybe grouse or something like that. They would be able to fly, of course, but these guys would be much more herbivorous, eating fruits, things like that. So I think that's really interesting and really sad that they didn't get put in the game, because these guys only eat fish in the game. These guys, I think, should be herbivores, and I think that really gives a little bit of diversity into the diets of the pterosaurs. But really awesome. These guys, as I mentioned, they're quite small, and they were named by Keller in 1989, and these guys, as I mentioned, they do not have that large keratinous crest that was much more likely Tropognathus. which is more assigned to like Navigans and Imperator, which now belong to members of Tropognathus. So Tapejara, Wallenholfi is kind of the single member of its genus, and the other two, Navigans and Imperator, are now Tropognathus, which is what the original Jurassic World Evolution 2 Tapejara is based on. So yeah, it's kind of a little bit confusing taxonomy, but I am in love with these guys. So kind of the same issue as I mentioned before with the wing membrane kind of not coming down to the legs there, and not that small one in there, but they got the short tail and they got really funky feet. They're plantigrade, so that means they walk on the soles of their feet as well. Digitigrade is kind of like with dinosaurs or elephants, even though they don't look it. They walk kind of, even like cats and dogs. Cats are a good example of this. They walk on their digits, so they walk on their fingers, while humans, bears, pterosaurs all walked on the soles of their feet as well. So that kind of tells you the difference between them. So all cats are all the time walking on their tippy toes, so just so you know. But yeah, really, really wonderful guy. And I've got to talk about the pycnofibers. So we have a lot of really, really well-preserved pterosaurs, kind of from these relatives here. But we have a really particularly well-preserved one from a relative of these guys. This guy's a Tapejara, that shows that it had pycnofibers, which are kind of the fuzz that you see on a lot of pterosaurs. It's pretty much the pterosaur equivalent to feathers, and they found that a lot of these filaments are quite similar to stage 3 feathers on birds. So they would have been kind of similar to something you'd see like on a kiwi or something like that, kind of that 3 stage. So that means they would have one stem and then a lot of little hairy bits sticking out. So that's kind of like almost like a downy feather, and it's stage 3. That's really interesting. We thought they pretty much just had filaments, just like almost just like hair, but it seems that these guys had much more complex feathers than we thought. And that raises the very interesting question of, did all dinosaurs and all pterosaurs, like their ancestors, did they have feathers? And then a lot of lineages like ankylosaurs, potentially tyrannosaurs, a lot of species, did they lose their feathers over time? Sauropods is a good example as well. But the group Ornithodira, because we have these feather-like filaments in the pterosaurs. We have feathers in obviously lots of birds and their relatives, dromaeosaurs, ornithomimids, tyrannosaurs, things like that. But then we also have feathers in ornithischians, such as like Tanulong and Psittacosaurus and animals like that. And it's like, do they actually all come from the same ancestor, or did they all evolve them independently? And that's really, really interesting question, because the group that includes both pterosaurs and dinosaurs, Ornithodira, that potentially means that feathers could have been ancestral to all the to all the animals in Ornithodira. So that's kind of where feathers began. But we don't really have the specimens to prove it, because those really early times, there's not a lot of fossils from that time, not a lot of rocks, and potentially not people just looking and studying. But I think that's just so interesting that potentially all dinosaurs and all pterosaurs could have had, the little ancestors of these guys could have all had feathers, and kind of a big juxtaposition from people thinking like all dinosaurs were big scaly monsters. I think that's just so cool, and really cool to talk about these guys as well. So really, really awesome. I'm a big fan, big fan. So next we've got, last but most definitely not least, we've got Tropognathus, which we'll talk a little bit about as well. So we've got to make sure that's obviously unpaused. Let's get one of them out. It's a bit quiet. I think it's just because I wanted to put down the sound. But let's look at this wonderful big guy. So these are very, very big pterosaurs. Tropognathus, as I mentioned, is like 8 meters wingspan, or 26 feet. So very, very large. Really only like the large astacods like Quetzalcoatlus and Hexagopteryx and all those guys. They were much bigger, but these guys, just huge. They were kind of the original specimen, if you guys know Walking with Dinosaurs, one of the Kairos. But these guys were obviously changed the name to Tropognathus. And their name means keeled jaw, and their also scientific name is kind of named from the Greek word southern, so they're from the southern hemisphere because they're found in Brazil. There's a lot of fossils from Brazil of these guys, and there's all sorts of different, like, we got the skull. The skull is huge. The skull's about 63 centimeters or 25 inches long, so about 2 feet long. Very, very huge. And at the end of the rostrum, as you can see, there's these two large crests, semicircular. They get about 9 inches long, or about 23 centimeters, and 4 inches or 10 centimeters tall, about this size. And they have the mandible that bears a similar one that's a little bit smaller. And we see that it doesn't really have that lateral spooning, the rostrum there, unlike a lot of its relatives, which is very interesting. And you can see the upper jaw here, as you can see, they've got these very large teeth. It's not quite the same as Maaradactylus, but these guys kind of had that similar adaptation as well. And what we know is from a very large individual with a skull. The large individual is about a meter-long skull. And it differs much because it has a much more steeper rear margin of the crest. So the rear of the crest is much steeper than the other one. And the wingspan is estimated to be 8 meters or so, which makes it one of the largest known pterosaurs. So these guys were quite a bit later living. These guys lived about 110 million years ago. So kind of that really early Cretaceous. And they lived in the rift of South Africa, South America, when it was separating from Africa. So these guys kind of would have lived in that fledgling Atlantic Ocean. And these guys were an aerial flyer that hunted in lakes and marine areas. And it's also been estimated or hypothesized that these crests may have actually helped them stabilize their snouts while dipping in the water, like a keel to a prow on the boat. But most likely they weren't skim feeding, but they were just doing their own thing. Really, really beautiful. And Tropognathus was realized was quite similar to the Ornithochirus, which was found in roughly contemporary rocks in England. And often people kind of lump them, but it's now universally accepted that it's not universally accepted that these are the same genus, but there is some, they're pretty similar, so a lot of people, it's just taxonomy being taxonomy, don't worry about it too much. But these guys, in terms of their phylogeny, how they're related to other species, they're often shown to be a close relative of Appenguara and Collibarhynchus, but not always found quite closely related to Ornithochirus, which kind of makes that weird. And in 2018, it found that these guys to be closely related to things like Ornithochirus, Collibarhynchus, Serradactylus, and Dactylus, and more distantly related Appenguara. So that shows how taxonomy can kind of be weird with these guys. And it seems that there seems to be this unresolved like trichotomy with colubrines and Collibarhynchans and Appenguarines, and also the Ornithochirus, which is found to be more basal, or the more at the bottom of the tree, which is very interesting. But just look at how huge these guys are. I'm a big fan. And let's see if we can get them just to move a little bit. There we are. So these guys were one of the biggest pterosaurs, just so big and beautiful. Really wonderful how this guy came out. And yeah, same issue. It's a little bit long. And these guys, you can clearly see just how long their wings are. These guys were very well adapted for soaring over coastal areas. And yeah, it's just, the one thing I want to mention about the game is that it just really doesn't show off the diversity of pterosaurs yet. Just look, even here, there's so much diversity. You can see this guy's almost like a plover or an oyster catcher. This guy was almost like a, I'm trying to think of a good example, like an owl or something, that kind of ecology. And these guys were very much like albatrosses and other seabirds, pyrans, these guys. So even though they're very different from pterosaurs, they had a lot of very similar ecologies and doing all sorts of different things, which is really, really awesome. And it's just awesome to talk about pterosaurs. I'm a big fan. So I've got another Tropognathus that we can grab out. Just think I just put the voice a bit low, but we can have a look at the different colors. I just have to say, I love the patterning on this guy. It's very reminiscent of seabird. I really like seabird patternings on pterosaurs, but yeah, really, really awesome. So you can see all these guys flying around, very, very loud. That's why I was kind of dreading this episode, but I think this is a good place to finish up. So zoom out and say, yeah. So I really, really, really hope you guys enjoyed this video. Hope you guys like and subscribe. Always remember to get the little bell icon to get notified about anything. So yeah, hope you guys enjoyed this video. Hope you guys like and subscribe. And bye-bye.